What could possibly cause a national war hero to fall so far, transforming from a celebrated champion of France into one of history's most horrifying criminals? On a grey morning in late October 1440, thousands stood in silence as flames consumed the body of Gilles de Rais, once a nobleman who rode beside Joan of Arc in battle. His name had become a byword, for the crowd watched not just an execution, but a reckoning, the final chapter of a life that had spiraled from honor into horror. This is not merely the story of a fallen man. It is a cautionary tale of how unchecked power can poison the soul, and how justice, when it comes, can reflect the magnitude of the sin it seeks to address. In an age already marked by brutality, the actions of Gilles de Rais shocked even hardened medieval hearts. His transformation from a respected knight to a perpetrator of atrocities forced a society steeped in hierarchy to confront its deepest fears, that power without conscience breeds destruction. Born around 1404 into immense wealth and status, Gilles de Rais inherited land stretching across Brittany and Anjou. From the beginning, his life was marked by privilege, and in his youth, he seemed to rise to the challenge-earning fame and admiration as a military leader during the 100 Years' War. He stood beside Joan of Arc during her miraculous campaigns, most notably at the Siege of Orléans in 1429. There, Gilles de Rais became not just a soldier, but a symbol of national hope, brave, commanding, and noble in both appearance and rank. Rewarded with the title of Marshal of France, he ascended to one of the kingdom's highest honors. His banner flew with the saints. His sword helped turn the tide of war. But even in the glow of victory, shadows began to form. To those paying attention, Gilles de Rais' obsession with grandeur hinted at deeper unrest. He lavished fortunes on pageants and choirs, filled his courts with mystics, and surrounded himself with men whose studies leaned toward forbidden arts. And then, in 1431, came the fire that changed everything. Joan of Arc's comrade, the beacon of divine courage, was taken, tried, and burned as a heretic. With her death, something in Gilles de Rais broke. The glory faded, and the man who once fought for liberation began searching for power in far, darker places. He withdrew to his estate's fortresses of stone and shadow where no laws could follow and no eyes could see. There, far from the courts of kings and the memories of battlefields, Gilles de Rais began a descent that would echo through history. Driven by an insatiable hunger for power, Gilles de Rais began to tread paths no soul should dare follow. Believing that ancient rites could unlock the secret to transmuting metals into gold, he surrounded himself with those who trafficked in darkness. Chief among them was Francesco Prelotti, an Italian conjurer who claimed to possess forbidden knowledgerites that could summon spirits with promises of wealth and dominion. Under Prelotti's influence, the ceremonies grew more elaborate and more dangerous. Gilles de Rais sought communion with unseen forces, spirits he believed could fulfill his desires, no matter the cost. And as with all such bargains, the cost was steep. These rituals demanded sacrifice. At first, it is said, animals may have been offered, but soon, Gilles de Rais' descent deepened. Historical testimony points to a horrifying truth. Children innocent, trusting, defenseless became the offerings he believed would be most pleasing to the entities he sought. The walls of his castles, once built to guard against foreign armies, now hid a terror far greater than war. Behind their gates, under his absolute control, no justice could reach, no cry for help could escape. Among his many fortresses, two names stand apart in infamy: Mercoul and Tiffauges. What were once symbols of noble defense became prisons of unimaginable cruelty. Within them, children faced sufferings that even hardened chroniclers struggled to put into words. The Baron's methods were chilling in their calculation. His agents would travel to nearby towns and villages, preying on poverty. They approached parents with gentle words and promises: work for their children, safety, a future. To families burdened by hunger and despair, it sounded like a miracle. But it was not salvation, it was betrayal. Inside the castle, the truth was revealed. The children were stripped not only of their clothes, but of every trace of innocence and comfort. Locked away in cold, dark chambers, they became the victims of tortures so cruel, so deliberate, that even the courts would later falter in recounting them. Some were only 6 or 7 years old. They suffered physical agony, emotional torment, and unspeakable violations, all inflicted to gratify Gilles de Rais's twisted pleasures and fuel his dark pursuits. Many were slowly strangled as he watched, others mutilated while still clinging to life. He believed, somehow, that their terror enhanced the potency of his rituals. And yet, for years, no one knew the full extent. It was only later, when those who had once served him began to speak, that the truth emerged. In court, under oath, they revealed a system of horror, built and maintained by a man who had once been honored as a hero. Their testimonies, preserved to this day, unveil the mind of a soul utterly surrendered to darkness. A man who abandoned mercy for power, who traded humanity for obsession. And in their words, the world saw not only what he had done, but what unchecked power, untethered from conscience, can become. According to accounts preserved through time, Gilles de Rais did not merely orchestrate his crimes from afar, he participated in them, directly and without mercy. Witnesses describe acts so chilling, they seem torn from the realm of nightmare. It is said he would sometimes kiss the children before taking their lives, a haunting mockery of tenderness, designed to deepen their terror in the final moments. For Gilles de Rais, the suffering was not just collateral, it was the point. He found a cruel satisfaction in the contrast between his calm, almost gentle exterior and the fate that awaited his victims. Psychological torment accompanied the physical horrors, making the pain more complete. The methods of murder were varied, but all bore the mark of prolonged cruelty. Some children were hung from iron hooks and slowly strangled as he looked on, savoring their final breath. Others suffered violent assaults that ended in death. Still others were dismembered alive, their cries echoing through stone chambers as Gilles de Rais watched with grim contentment. After each act of horror, the remains were burned in secret furnaces hidden within his castles. The ashes were scattered or buried in nameless plots, erasing every trace. This chilling precision allowed the Baron to continue for years, protected by status, isolation, and silence. The scale of these atrocities defies comprehension. Even the most conservative records speak of at least 80 victims. Some scholars believe the number surpassed 200, but numbers cannot capture what was truly lost each child. A life unfinished. Each family left in grief without answers, without closure. Gilles de Rais did not act alone. Around him was a ring of men who shared his guiltsome, seduced by power and wealth. Others, driven by fear, or manipulated into silence. Together, they formed a network of complicity that shielded the truth and enabled the evil to thrive. Among them were two of his most trusted attendants, Henri Gria and Etienne Corot, known as Poitou. They served as his confidants, his hands in darkness. It was they who helped abduct the children, who aided in their torture, who disposed of the bodies with practiced routine. Their loyalty was bought with gold, secured by shared sin. Even Gilles de Rais' cousin, Gilles, fellow nobleman, was part of this circle of corruption. He offered money, and perhaps worse, his approval. The involvement of another aristocrat revealed just how deeply this evil had taken root within the ranks of privilege, and how easily nobility could become a cloak for wickedness. And then there was the conjurer, Francesco Pillatitha, spiritual architect of this horror. It was he who offered the twisted theology that turned murder into ritual. He told Gilles de Rais that the deaths of children could serve a higher magical purpose, that their pain held power. Through his words, superstition became justification, and barbarity became belief. Evil rarely thrives in isolation. Within Gilles de Rais' castles, even ordinary servants became, in time, part of the silence. Some acted out of fear, others perhaps were drawn in by rewards or numbed by routine. But they stayed. They cleaned the blood. They looked away. They served a master they knew in their hearts to be a monster. Their silence speaks to a deeper truth, that power, when left unchecked, corrupts not only the one who wields it, but those who stand too close without courage to resist. For years, Gilles de Rais' noble title and unimaginable wealth kept the world at bay. In a medieval society built upon hierarchy and unquestioned loyalty, few dared to challenge a marshal of France. Rumors drifted through the countryside, stories of missing children, of strange sounds from the castle walls, but fear held tongue still. It was not the law, but the church, that finally pierced the veil. As his wealth diminished, Gilles de Rais began selling off his lands. Alarmed, his family petitioned church authorities to intervene, hoping to protect what remained of the family fortune. That appeal set in motion a chain of events no one could stop. In 1440, Gilles de Rais made a grave mistake. Amid a dispute over land, he kidnapped a cleric named Jean Leferon, holding him captive at his castle in Machecoul. That single act, bold and foolish, gave the church what secular authorities had long lacked: a reason and a right to investigate. Led by the Bishop of Nantes, the inquiry began as a simple matter of ecclesiastical law. But what they uncovered was anything but simple. As investigators pressed deeper, witnesses emerged. Servants who had buried their guilt, parents who had lost their children, neighbors who could no longer ignore the shadows. Together, their testimonies formed a chilling mosaic picture of systematic child murder, so vast and cruel that even the most seasoned officials were shaken. What began as a property dispute had unveiled one of history's darkest crime sprees. The trial commenced in September 1400, 1340 in the city of Nantes, presided over by church authorities, who alone held the power to judge both heresy and murder. The proceedings were unlike anything the court had seen before. The crimes defied language, the suffering incalculable. Gilles de Rais, once proud, refused at first to recognize the court's authority. As Marshal of France, he claimed exemption from ecclesiastical law. But that bravado could not hold. One by one, the witnesses spoke. Their accounts vivid, consistent. Heartbreaking left little doubt. Even his allies began to abandon him, unable to deny what had become undeniable. When the court opened its doors to testimony, the truth poured in with devastating force. Parents came forward, their voices heavy with sorrow, describing the day their children vanished. Servants broke years of silence to recount the horrors they had seen. And former accomplices granted immunity in exchange for truth, revealed the inner workings of evil. The evidence was undeniable. Child after child had disappeared near Gilles de Rais' castles. Witnesses had seen them pass through the gates, never to return. And as the weight of this truth mounted, even the most stoic onlookers were left shaken. Faced with this mountain of proof and the looming threat of torture, Gilles de Rais confessed. It was October 1440. His words, spoken in detail and with a strange blend of sorrow and satisfaction, shocked the court. He admitted to taking the lives of children driven by both perverse desire and a belief in occult power. He could not count them all, he said, but he believed the number exceeded 140. The confession sent shockwaves through France. This was a man who had stood beside Joan of Arc, who had been honored as a Marshal of France. To hear such a figure speak calmly of crimes that seemed torn from the darkest corners of the soul was to question how such evil could hide beneath the mask of valor. There could be only one verdict. On the 25th of October, 1440, the court sentenced Gilles de Rais to death. The charges were many: murder, sodomy, heresy, and summoning demonic forces. The sentence reflected the full weight of medieval justice that sought not only to punish, but to purify. He was to be hanged until dead, and then his body would be burned to ash. This was not just an execution. It was a symbolic act meant to cleanse, to erase, and to warn. Burning was reserved for crimes so vile that no trace could be allowed to remain. The flames were to devour not only the man, but the memory of his corruption. News of the coming execution spread swiftly. By the morning of the 26th of October, thousands had gathered in a field near Nantes. Nobles, peasants, clergy people of every station stood shoulder to shoulder, not merely to witness justice, but to be part of it. For them, this was no ordinary punishment. It was a kind of exorcisma way to cast out the darkness that had haunted their land for too long. That final night, Gilles de Rais was not alone. He spent it in prayer, flanked by priests who sought to prepare his soul for whatever lay beyond. Some say he wept deeply, sincerely as he reflected on the suffering he had caused. Others wonder if this remorse was real, or simply the last mask of a man who had worn many. His final hours were a strange mix of sacred rite and public ritual. While he confessed and sought peace, the crowd gathered in silence, preparing to watch one of the most infamous executions in France's history. The morning of the 26th of October, 1440, broke beneath a sky of gray silence over the city of Nantes. A cold wind whispered through the fields where justice would soon be done. By midday, a vast multitude had assembled, nobles in fine cloaks, villagers in worn wool, priests with solemn faces, and peasants with eyes wide open. More than 10,000 hearts beat as one, drawn not merely by curiosity, but by the need to witness the fall of a man whose shadow had darkened their land for far too long. This was no ordinary execution. It had become, in the hearts of many, a ritual of cleansing, a communal act of rejection against the evil that had quietly devoured so many innocents. Gilles de Rais was brought forth in a wooden cart, flanked by guards and clergy. He wore simple garments, absent the grandeur that once marked his nobility. To those who remembered him as a war hero, the contrast was jarring. The man who had once ridden in triumph beside Joan of Arc now approached the gallows not with a sword, but with shackles and shame. The scaffold stood tall, framed by a pyre beneath it, carefully prepared with dry wood and straw. Its message was unmistakable. Just as he had reduced children to ash in secret furnaces, so too would his own body be returned to dust, with no grave, no marker, no memory, but in infamy. Before the sentence was carried out, Gilles de Rais was offered a final word. His voice, perhaps the last remnant of the nobleman he once was, rose above the hush. He asked forgiveness. From God, from the families, from the nation he had betrayed. He warned the noble class, his peers, of the pride and indulgence that had led him to ruin. Whether his remorse was real or merely the final act of a life built on performance, only heaven knows. But in that moment, his words were heard by thousands, and his fall was sealed. At the judge's signal, the execution proceeded. The noose tightened, the body fell, and after a short struggle, the man who had once held the highest honors in France breathed no more. But the punishment was not yet complete. His lifeless form was lowered gently onto the pyre. Executioners moved with deliberate care, ensuring the flames would consume every trace. As the fire was lit, a hush fell. Then came the crackle of flame, the rising heat, the orange glow that lit the gray afternoon like a beacon. The crowd watched not in triumph, but in solemn oise. The fire reached into the sky. There would be no relics, no grave to weep over or revere. The fire was fed steadily, until the once feared baron was nothing but ash. It was justice. Yes, but also something more. A warning, a reckoning, a cry that echoed across the fields. This is what becomes of unchecked power, of darkness left unchallenged. The burning took hours to complete. Flames rose and fell, tirelessly fed by seasoned wood, until every trace of Gilles de Rais' body had been reduced to ash. The crowdance, restless with anticipation now, stood in reverent silence. Many crossed themselves. Others bowed their heads in prayer. All bore witness to the final undoing of a man who had once stood among France's most powerful. The image of the fire consuming his flesh became an unforgettable warning, a stark reminder of what awaits those who surrender their souls to darkness. Contemporary chroniclers recorded that his ashes were scattered as soon as the flames died. There would be no relics, no tombstone, no chance for misguided reverence. This final act of erasure was both practical and symbolic a way for society to declare, with unmistakable clarity, that such evil would find no place among the living or the remembered. Thus ended one of medieval Europe's most horrifying chapters. Gilda, the war hero who had once marched beside Joan of Arc, was now consumed by the same fire that had claimed her, yet the contrast could not be more profound. Joan was martyred for her purity and conviction. Gilles destroyed for his cruelty and corruption. Though his life ended that day in smoke and flame, his story did not. His crimes and the extraordinary trial that exposed them became legend. They were retold in chronicles, whispered in sermons, and woven into ballads meant not to entertain, but to warn. His name became synonymous with the fall of power, the betrayal of innocence, the corruption of the soul. The trial of Gilles marked a turning point. It showed that no title, no wealth, no battlefield honor could shield a man from justice when his sins became too grave to ignore. Ecclesiastical courts, in this case, succeeded where royal authority had hesitated, setting a precedent that would shape justice for generations. The echoes of his crimes reached beyond the victims' families. They shook the foundations of medieval society, forcing it to confront a terrible truth that even those we lift up as heroes can carry within them a darkness too deep to fathom. Modern psychology would later give names to what Gilles became: a sadistic predator, a serial killer. But his evil transcended any label. His cruelty was systematic, ritualized, and targeted the most defenseless. His desire to dominate, to destroy, revealed the terrible extremes of human depravity when no moral boundary remains. And so his tale still speaks. Across the centuries, it stands as a mirror reflecting not just the horror of what was done, but the danger of what could still be. The transformation of a noble into a monster reminds us that titles mean nothing without virtue, and that power, when divorced from conscience, can become the greatest threat of all. The fire that turned his body to ash may have long faded, but the lessons it lit remain. They flicker in the shadows of history, warning each new generation to guard their hearts, to hold fast to what is right, and to never look away when evil cloaks itself in honor.